My name is Allison Parker, and I'm 28 years old. The day my family called my partner Derek a worthless loser at Sunday dinner was the day I realized they had no idea who they were really dealing with. What happened 3 months later when Derek walked into their house as their new mortgage holder still gives me chills. But let me start from the beginning, because the revenge that followed was so perfectly calculated, it felt like watching karma work in real time. Before we dive into this story, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy stories about underdogs getting the ultimate revenge. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. Trust me, you'll want to stick around for this one. It's about what happens when you underestimate the quiet guy in the corner who's been listening to everything. Let me paint you a picture of my family first, because understanding them is crucial to appreciating what Derek eventually did to them. The Parkers have always been what you'd call old money pretentious, the kind of people who judge everyone by their job title, their car, and whether they went to the right college. My father, Charles Parker, owns a chain of mid-tier restaurants across the state. Nothing spectacular, but enough to keep us comfortable and feed his ego about being a successful businessman. My mother, Grace, has never worked a day in her life but considers herself an expert on everyone else's career choices. My older brother Trevor thinks he's God's gift to the corporate world because he landed a middle management position at a tech company through Dad's connections. And my younger sister Hannah? She's 24 and still living at home, bouncing between part-time jobs while our parents fund her lifestyle and call it finding herself. Then there's me. I work as a marketing coordinator at a nonprofit, which already puts me in the disappointment category according to my family's standards. But the real problem started when I began dating Derek 6 months ago. Derek is quiet, thoughtful, and absolutely brilliant. He's 30, drives a modest Honda Civic, and lives in a small apartment downtown. When I first brought him to meet my family, I could see their judgment forming before he even opened his mouth. He was wearing a simple button-down shirt and khakis, nothing flashy, nothing expensive. To them, he looked like exactly what they expected from someone dating their underachieving daughter. "So, Derek," my father said during that first dinner, cutting into his steak with unnecessary aggression, "what do you do for work?" "I'm in real estate," Derek replied simply, taking a sip of water. "Oh, a realtor," my mother exclaimed with that fake enthusiasm she uses when she's about to say something cutting. "How lovely. That must be challenging in this market." I watched Derek's jaw tighten slightly, but he just nodded. "It has its ups and downs." "I bet," Trevor chimed in, barely looking up from his phone. "My buddy tried real estate for a while. Said it was basically a dead end unless you're selling million-dollar homes, which, let's be honest, most people aren't qualified for." The condescension in his voice made my skin crawl, but Derek handled it with more grace than I would have. "Every market has its opportunities," he said calmly. That first dinner set the tone for everything that followed. My family had decided Derek was beneath us, and nothing was going to change their minds. Or so I thought. Over the next few months, the subtle digs became less subtle. Every family gathering turned into an opportunity for them to make Derek feel small. They'd ask pointed questions about his little real estate thing, make jokes about him working on commission, and constantly suggest that I could do better. The worst part was how they'd talk about him when he wasn't there. During a girls' shopping trip, my mother pulled me aside in the middle of Nordstrom and said, "Sweetheart, I know you think you love him, but you have to be practical. Derek seems like a nice boy, but he's not substantial. You need someone who can provide for you properly." "Mom, I can provide for myself," I replied, feeling my temper rise. "And Derek is doing just fine." "Oh, honey," she laughed, that patronizing laugh that made me want to scream. "Driving that little car, living in that tiny apartment? That's not just fine for a man his age. That's barely getting by. Hannah nodded eagerly, always ready to pile on. Yeah, Allison. Remember when you brought him to my birthday party? He couldn't even afford to go in on the expensive wine everyone else brought. He showed up with a bottle from the grocery store. A perfectly good bottle of wine, I said through gritted teeth. Perfectly adequate, maybe, my mother corrected. But not what we're used to. You've always had such high standards, dear. Don't lower them now. These conversations were happening more and more frequently. Every family event became an exercise in defending Derek's worth to people who had already made up their minds. The breaking point came at our monthly Sunday dinner in October. I should have known something was wrong when I arrived and saw Trevor's smug expression. He was practically vibrating with excitement about something, which usually meant bad news for someone else. Derek and I had barely sat down when the interrogation began. So, Derek, my father started, carving the roast with theatrical precision. Allison mentioned you've been looking at some properties lately. Planning to upgrade from that apartment? Derek set down his fork carefully. I've been considering some options, yes. Considering, Trevor repeated with a snort. That's code for window shopping, right? I mean, on a realtor's salary, what can you actually afford? A one-bedroom condo in the suburbs? Trevor, I warned, but Derek put a gentle hand on my arm. It's okay, Allison, he said quietly. Then, to Trevor, I'm looking at a few different properties. Nothing's decided yet. Right, my mother said, passing the vegetables with exaggerated care. Well, there's nothing wrong with being realistic about your budget. Not everyone can afford the finer things in life. That's when Hannah decided to twist the knife. I drove past Derek's apartment building last week, she announced cheerfully. It's actually kind of cute. Very modest. The parking lot has those funny little cracks in it, and the building could use some paint, but it has character. The table went quiet. Even for my family, that was a particularly cruel way to highlight Derek's modest living situation. I felt my face burning with embarrassment and anger, but Derek just nodded. It serves its purpose, he said simply. Of course it does, my father said, and I could hear the condescension dripping from every word. Everyone has to start somewhere. The important thing is having realistic expectations about where you'll end up. Trevor was practically bouncing in his seat now. Speaking of realistic expectations, Derek, I've been thinking about your career situation. Trevor, don't, I said, sensing disaster approaching. No, hear me out, he continued, waving his fork around like he was conducting an orchestra. I actually know some people in the real estate business, and they've told me how tough it is for small-time agents. The competition, the market fluctuations, the fact that most people wash out within their first 2 years. Trevor, stop it, I snapped. I'm just being helpful, he protested. Look, Derek seems like a nice guy, but let's be honest about what we're dealing with here. He's 30 years old, drives a car that's probably worth less than Dad's monthly restaurant expenses, and lives in an apartment that Hannah described as having character, which we all know is real estate code for falling apart. My mother made a soft sound of agreement. Trevor does have a point, dear. At Derek's age, a man should be established. Should have something to show for his efforts. What Trevor is trying to say, my father added, cutting his meat with unnecessary violence, is that we're concerned about your future, Allison. You're a smart, accomplished young woman. You deserve someone who can match your ambition, someone with real prospects. The room fell silent except for the sound of silverware against plates. I looked around the table at these people, my family, who were sitting there calmly discussing Derek like he was a piece of furniture they were considering discarding. Derek is sitting right here, I said, my voice shaking with anger. You're talking about him like he's not even in the room. We're not trying to be cruel, my mother said with fake sympathy. We're just being practical. Love is wonderful, dear, but it doesn't pay the bills. It doesn't buy houses or provide security for the future. Derek had been quiet through this entire exchange, but I could see the muscle in his jaw working. Finally, he spoke. I appreciate your concern for Allison's future, he said, his voice perfectly controlled. You're right that security is important. Everyone deserves to feel secure. Exactly. Trevor said, apparently missing the careful way Derek had phrased that response. So you understand why we're a little concerned about the whole situation. Derek nodded slowly. I understand perfectly. Something in his tone made me look at him more closely. There was something different in his expression, something I'd never seen before. Not anger, exactly, but something colder. More calculating. The thing is, Derek continued, still in that perfectly controlled voice, security can come from many different sources. Sometimes it comes from places people don't expect. My father laughed, that booming, condescending laugh that had made me cringe my entire childhood. Well, of course, son. But in the real world, security comes from steady income, solid investments, and making smart financial decisions. It comes from building something substantial. You're absolutely right, Derek agreed. Building something substantial is exactly what matters. The conversation moved on to other topics after that, but something had shifted. Derek was quieter than usual, more thoughtful. When we left that night, I tried to apologize for my family's behavior, but he just shook his head. Don't apologize for them, Allison, he said as we sat in his Honda Civic in my parents' driveway. People show you who they are. Your family has shown me exactly who they are. They're not bad people, I said, though the words felt hollow. They're just set in their ways. They think they're protecting me. Derek was quiet for a long moment, staring out at my parents' house. It was a nice house, not a mansion, but solid and respectable. The kind of house that said we're doing well without being ostentatious. That's a beautiful house, he said finally. I grew up there, I replied, not sure where he was going with this. Good neighborhood. Probably worth, what, 400,000? I shrugged. Something like that. Why? Derek started the car, but he was still looking at the house. Just curious about the real estate in this area. Professional interest. As we drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something important had just happened, but I couldn't put my finger on what it was. The next few weeks were blissfully quiet on the family front. Derek and I fell into our normal routine, dinners at small restaurants, walks through downtown, quiet evenings at his apartment watching movies. He seemed more distracted than usual, often getting phone calls that he'd take in the other room, but I figured it was work-related. Real estate agents are always dealing with clients and schedules. Then, 3 weeks after that disastrous Sunday dinner, Derek asked me a strange question. We were having breakfast at our favorite little cafe when he looked up from his phone and said, Allison, what's your parents' mortgage situation like? I nearly choked on my coffee. What? Their house. Do they own it outright, or do they still have a mortgage? That's a weird question, I said, studying his face. Why do you want to know? Derek shrugged, but there was something careful about the gesture. Just curious. You mentioned your dad's been in business for a long time. I was wondering if he'd paid off the house by now. I think they refinanced a few years ago, I said slowly. Dad mentioned something about taking advantage of low interest rates. Why are you asking? No reason, Derek said, but he was already looking back at his phone. Just making conversation. But it wasn't just conversation, and over the next few days, I started noticing other things. Derek was getting more phone calls than usual, and they seemed more serious. I'd catch fragments of conversations about closing dates and due diligence and final approvals. When I asked him about it, he'd just say it was a complicated deal he was working on. Then, 2 weeks later, I got a frantic call from my mother. "Allison, you need to come home right now," she said, her voice high and tight with panic. "What's wrong?" I asked, immediately worried. "Is someone hurt?" "No one's hurt, but we have a situation. A serious situation. Can you come home? And bring Derek." "Bring Derek?" "Mom, what's going on?" "Just come home," she said, and hung up. I called Derek immediately. He was in the middle of something. I could hear papers rustling and other voices in the background, but he agreed to meet me at my parents' house. When we pulled up, I could see my entire family gathered in the living room through the big picture window. They all looked tense, worried. My father was pacing, which was never a good sign. Derek parked his Honda Civic in the driveway, right next to Trevor's BMW and Hannah's Mercedes, a gift from our parents for her college graduation. As we walked to the front door, I noticed Derek seemed unusually calm for someone who'd been summoned to an emergency family meeting. My mother opened the door before we could knock. Her face was pale, and she looked like she'd been crying. "Thank God you're here," she said, grabbing my arm and pulling me inside. "We need to talk." The entire family was assembled in the living room, but the atmosphere was completely different from our usual gatherings. Instead of the casual arrogance I was used to, everyone looked worried, confused, and more than a little frightened. "Sit down," my father said without his usual commanding presence. "Both of you." Derek and I took seats on the couch while my family arranged themselves around us like we were about to have an intervention. "We got some news today," my father began, his voice shaky. "About the house." "What about the house?" I asked, looking around at their faces. Trevor was the one who answered, and for the first time in my life, he looked genuinely rattled. "Someone bought our mortgage." I felt Derek go very still beside me. "What do you mean, someone bought your mortgage?" "The bank sold our loan," my mother explained, twisting her hands in her lap. "To a private investor. We got a letter this morning saying we'll be making our payments to a new company now." "That happens sometimes," I said, still confused about why this was such a crisis. "Banks sell mortgages all the time. It's not necessarily a bad thing." "The new company is called Chen Holdings," my father said, and his voice cracked slightly on the name. I felt the blood drain from my face. "Chen." Derek's last name was Chen. "The thing is," Hannah added, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it, "we've been struggling a little with the payments lately." "Struggling how?" I demanded, looking around at my family. My father's restaurant business, it turned out, hadn't been doing as well as he'd led everyone to believe. 2 locations had closed in the past year, and the remaining ones were barely breaking even. They'd been using credit cards to make their mortgage payments for the past 6 months, hoping things would turn around. "We're 3 months behind," my father admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "The bank was working with us, giving us time to catch up, but now there's a new mortgage holder," my mother finished. "And they want to meet with us tomorrow." The room fell silent. I could hear the clock ticking on the mantel, the sound of cars passing outside, my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. "Did they say who they wanted to meet with?" Derek asked quietly. "The whole family," Trevor said, staring at Derek with an expression I couldn't read. "They specifically requested that everyone be here. Including you." Derek nodded slowly. "I see." You don't think? My mother started, then stopped, looking at Derek with growing suspicion. Chen Holdings. It's not a coincidence, is it? Derek was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card, which he placed on the coffee table in front of my parents. The card was simple, elegant. It read, Derek Chen, President and CEO, Chen Holdings, LLC. The silence that followed was deafening. My father picked up the card with shaking hands, staring at it like it might explode. This is you? Yes, Derek said simply. You bought our mortgage? My mother whispered. Yes. Trevor shot to his feet, his face flushing red. You son of a bitch. You've been planning this the whole time. Trevor, sit down, Derek said, and there was something in his voice, a quiet authority I'd never heard before, that made Trevor actually obey. I don't understand, I said, looking back and forth between Derek and my family. Derek, what's going on? He turned to me, and his expression softened slightly. Remember when you asked me what I did for work, and I said real estate? I nodded. I wasn't lying. I am in real estate. I just didn't mention that I'm primarily an investor, not an agent. Chen Holdings owns 43 properties across the state, including 12 commercial buildings and 31 residential mortgages. My mouth fell open. 31 mortgages? 32 now, he said, gesturing toward my parents. The room exploded into chaos. Everyone started talking at once, my mother demanding to know how this was possible, Trevor accusing Derek of fraud, Hannah crying, my father just staring at the business card like it held the secrets of the universe. Enough. Derek's voice cut through the noise like a knife. Everyone fell silent immediately. When Derek spoke again, his voice was calm, controlled, but there was steel underneath it. Let me explain how this works. Your mortgage was in default. The bank was losing money on the deal, so they sold it to me at a significant discount. This is perfectly legal, perfectly standard business practice. But why? My mother asked, tears streaming down her face. Why would you do this to us? Derek looked around the room at each of them, really looked at them, like he was seeing them clearly for the first time. 3 months ago, he said quietly, I sat at your dinner table and listened to you explain why I wasn't good enough for your daughter. You talked about security, about building something substantial, about having something to show for your efforts. He stood up slowly, and suddenly he seemed taller, more imposing than the quiet man I thought I knew. You judged me based on my car, my apartment, my clothes. You decided I was a loser, a failure, someone with no prospects and no future. You made it very clear that you thought Allison could do better. My father found his voice. Derek, son, if we said anything that offended you. You did more than offend me, Derek continued, his voice steady and cold. You dismissed me. You treated me like I was nothing, like my feelings and my worth as a person didn't matter. You talked about me like I wasn't sitting right there. He walked over to the mantelpiece, where family photos were displayed. Photos of graduations, weddings, holidays. He picked up one of my college graduation and looked at it thoughtfully. The irony is that while you were sitting here judging my worth based on superficial things, I was actually evaluating your financial situation. Professional habit, I suppose. Your father mentioned refinancing the house, your spending patterns, the cars you drive, the lifestyle you maintain. It didn't take much research to figure out that the Parker family was living beyond their means. Trevor was white as a sheet now. You investigated us? I did my due diligence, Derek corrected. When the bank put your mortgage up for sale, I recognized the address. I recognized the opportunity. He set the photo down and turned back to face them. You wanted to know what I had to show for my efforts? You wanted to see something substantial? Well, congratulations. You're looking at it. I now hold the mortgage on your family home. My mother was crying openly now. What do you want from us? Derek sat back down next to me, and when he spoke, his voice was gentler but no less firm. I want you to understand something. Success doesn't always look the way you expect it to. The man you called a loser, the man you said wasn't good enough for your daughter, now literally owns the roof over your heads. The weight of that statement settled over the room like a heavy blanket. However, Derek continued, and I heard my family collectively hold their breath. I'm not a vindictive person. I'm a businessman. Here's what's going to happen. He pulled out a folder from his briefcase. When had he brought a briefcase? I was realizing there were a lot of things about Derek I apparently didn't know. You're currently 3 months behind on your payments, which puts you in technical default. I could foreclose immediately if I wanted to. But I don't want to. What I want is for you to get caught up on your payments and moving forward, to treat this like the business arrangement it is. He opened the folder and pulled out several documents. I'm prepared to offer you a modified payment plan. Lower monthly payments, extended terms, and a 6-month grace period to get back on your feet. The total amount owed will be higher due to the extended terms, but it will be manageable based on your current income. My father looked at the papers with confusion. Why would you help us after the way we treated you? Derek looked at me, then back at my parents. Because despite everything, you're Allison's family. And I love Allison. The simplicity of that statement hit me like a physical blow. Here was this man I'd thought I knew, who had just revealed himself to be someone completely different, someone powerful, successful, strategic, and his primary concern was still my feelings. But there are conditions, Derek continued, his business voice returning. First, you'll make your payments on time every month, no exceptions. Second, you'll treat this as a professional relationship. I'm not doing this as a favor or out of the goodness of my heart. I'm doing this because it makes good business sense. He stood up again, and this time when he looked around the room, I could see that the power dynamic had completely shifted. My family, who had spent months looking down on Derek, were now hanging on his every word. And third, Derek said, his voice quiet but carrying absolute authority, you will never again speak to or about me the way you did 3 months ago. You misjudged me based on appearances and assumptions. You treated me with disrespect and condescension. That ends now. Trevor, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally found his voice. What if we say no? What if we don't agree to your conditions? Derek shrugged. Then I'll foreclose. The house will be sold at auction, probably for much less than it's worth in this market. You'll lose your home, your equity, and your credit will be destroyed. Then you can find somewhere else to live and start over from scratch. The casual way he delivered this devastating possibility made it clear that he wasn't bluffing. This wasn't an emotional threat, it was a simple business calculation. Of course, Derek added thoughtfully, I might be interested in buying the house myself if it goes to auction. It's a good property in a nice neighborhood. I could probably get it for 60-70 cents on the dollar. My mother made a sound like she'd been punched. So those are your options, Derek concluded. Accept my terms for a modified payment plan, or lose the house and watch me potentially buy it at auction for a fraction of what you owe. The room was silent except for my mother's quiet crying. Finally, my father spoke. The payment plan. We'll take the payment plan. Derek nodded and slid the documents across the coffee table. You have 24 hours to review these with a lawyer if you want. The offer expires tomorrow at 5 p.m. He stood up and straightened his jacket, the same modest jacket my family had smirked at 3 months ago. Somehow it looked different now. More expensive. More authoritative. Allison, he said, turning to me. Are you ready to go? I stood up automatically, my mind still reeling from everything I'd just witnessed. As we walked toward the door, my mother called out. Derek, wait. He turned back, his expression neutral. We. She struggled with the words. We're sorry. For what we said. For how we treated you. Derek nodded acknowledgement, but his expression didn't change. Apology noted. It wasn't acceptance, and it wasn't forgiveness. It was just acknowledgement. As we walked to the car, I felt like I was in a dream. The man beside me looked the same modest clothes, same quiet demeanor, but everything else had changed. We drove in silence for several minutes before I finally found my voice. Derek, I said quietly. Who are you? He glanced at me, and for the first time since we'd arrived at my parents' house, he smiled. The familiar, warm smile I'd fallen in love with. I'm the same person I've always been, Allison. I just didn't tell you everything about what I do for work. Chen Holdings owns 43 properties? 44 now, technically. I closed on a small apartment building this morning. I stared at him. And you live in a small apartment and drive a Honda Civic because I like my apartment, and the Honda is reliable, he said simply. I don't need to flash my wealth around to feel good about myself. We drove in silence for a few more minutes while I processed this. How long have you been planning this? I asked finally. Derek pulled into the parking lot of our favorite coffee shop and turned off the engine. I wasn't planning anything, initially. When your family started making those comments about my financial situation, I got curious about theirs. It's an occupational hazard. I tend to analyze people's financial situations automatically. He turned in his seat to face me. When I realized your parents were struggling, I kept an eye on their situation. When their mortgage came up for sale, I saw an opportunity. An opportunity for revenge? Derek was quiet for a moment, considering the question. An opportunity for a lesson, he said finally. Your family judged me based on superficial things. They decided I wasn't worthy of their daughter because I didn't display my success in ways they recognized. I wanted them to understand that their assumptions were wrong. By buying their mortgage? By giving them a chance to see me as I really am, Derek corrected. I could have let them lose the house. I could have bought it at auction and kicked them out. Instead, I'm offering them a way to keep their home and get back on their feet. I thought about this. But you also made it clear that you have all the power now. Derek nodded. Because I do. That's not revenge, Allison. That's just reality. They created this situation with their financial mismanagement. I'm offering them a solution, but it comes with conditions. And if they had treated you with respect from the beginning? Derek smiled. Then when their mortgage came up for sale, I probably would have made sure it went to someone who would work with them, rather than buying it myself. The elegance of it was stunning. Derek hadn't set out to destroy my family, he'd simply positioned himself to be in control when their own poor decisions caught up with them. It was strategic, calculated, and completely legal. Are you angry with me? Derek asked, and for the first time since this whole thing started, he looked uncertain. I thought about it. Was I angry? I was definitely shocked, overwhelmed, confused. But angry? I'm angry that you didn't trust me enough to tell me who you really were, I said finally. I'd been defending you to my family for months, telling them they were wrong about you. And it turns out I didn't really know you either. Derek's face fell. Allison, but, I continued, I'm not angry about what you did. My family treated you terribly, They judged you, dismissed you, and talked about you like you were nothing. What you did, it wasn't cruel. It was just consequences. Derek reached over and took my hand. I should have told you about the business. I was going to, eventually. I liked being with someone who cared about me for who I am, not what I own. I squeezed his hand. I do care about you for who you are. But Derek, who you are includes being brilliant, successful, and powerful. Those aren't bad things. Your family thought they were. They thought my success was impossible because of how I dressed, where I lived, what I drove. My family was wrong about a lot of things, I said firmly. But you were wrong too, if you thought hiding your success from me was protecting our relationship. Derek nodded slowly. You're right. I'm sorry. We sat in the car for a while longer, both of us processing everything that had happened. Finally, Derek asked the question I'd been dreading. What happens now? With us, I mean. I thought about it. The man I'd fallen in love with was still there, the kindness, the intelligence, the dry sense of humor. But now I also knew about the business acumen, the strategic thinking, the quiet power he wielded. It was a lot to take in, but it wasn't bad. If anything, it made him more attractive. Now, I said, I think you should take me to see your real apartment. Derek laughed, the first genuine laugh I'd heard from him all day. My real apartment? The one you actually live in when you're not maintaining your cover story. I'm guessing it's not the modest little place downtown you showed me. Derek's smile was sheepish. It's a penthouse. Downtown, but higher up. How much higher up? Top floor. 32nd floor. I shook my head, laughing despite everything. 32nd floor. And you've been pretending to live in that ground floor apartment because I wanted to see if you'd like me without all the accessories. Derek, I said, looking him straight in the eyes, I fell in love with you when I thought you were a struggling real estate agent. Learning that you're actually a real estate mogul doesn't make me love you less. It just makes me proud to be with someone so successful. The relief on his face made my heart ache. How long had he been carrying this secret, worried that his success would somehow change how I felt about him? There's something else, Derek said hesitantly. About your family's situation. What about it? The payment plan I offered them? It's actually better than what they had with the bank. Lower interest rate, more favorable terms. They'll end up paying less in the long run than they would have with their original mortgage. I stared at him. So you're actually helping them? I'm helping them while making it clear that their assumptions about me were wrong, Derek corrected. It's good business, and it sends a message. The message was clear. Derek Chen was not the man they thought he was, and their financial security now depended on him. It was a master class in quiet power. What about your parents? Derek asked as we finally got out of the car. How do you think they'll handle this long term? I thought about it. My dad will be grateful, eventually. He's a businessman, even if he's not a particularly good one. He'll recognize that you could have destroyed them and chose not to. My mom will have a harder time with it. Her worldview has been pretty thoroughly shattered. And Trevor and Hannah? Trevor's ego is going to take a while to recover. Hannah will probably be fine once she realizes you're not going to kick them out of the house. Derek nodded. What about you? How are you going to handle having a family that's financially dependent on your boyfriend? It was a good question, and one I hadn't fully considered yet. The power dynamic in my family had shifted dramatically. I was no longer the disappointing daughter, I was now the daughter dating the man who held the mortgage on the family home. I think, I said slowly, that maybe my family needed to learn some humility. They've been so focused on appearances, on judging people by surface-level things, that they forgot how to see people for who they really are. Including you? Especially me, I admitted. I'd been the family disappointment for so long, I started to believe it myself. But dating you, even before I knew about the business empire, made me realize that their opinions don't define my worth. Derek stopped walking and pulled me into his arms right there in the parking lot. "Allison Parker," he said, "you are the most valuable thing in my life. Not because of what you do for work or how much money you make or what your family thinks of you. Because of who you are. A woman who's dating a secret real estate mogul, apparently. A woman who saw something in me when no one else could," Derek corrected. A woman who defended me to her family even when it cost her. A woman who just found out her boyfriend has been lying to her for months and is still here. He had a point. "So," I said, stepping back and looking him up and down like I was seeing him for the first time. "Derek Chen, real estate mogul and owner of my family's mortgage. What do you do for fun when you're not quietly destroying people's assumptions about you?" Derek grinned. "Would you like to find out?" 3 weeks later, I was sitting in Derek's actual apartment, a stunning penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the entire city, when my phone rang. It was my mother. "Allison, honey," she said, and her voice was different. Humbler. "I was wondering if you and Derek would like to come to dinner on Sunday." "Just dinner?" I asked, raising an eyebrow at Derek, who was reading the financial section of the newspaper at his granite kitchen island. "No interrogations about Derek's life choices?" "No interrogations," my mother promised. We owe Derek an apology. A real one. And we owe you an apology too." "For what?" "For not seeing what was right in front of us," my mother said quietly. "Derek is a good man, Allison. We were so focused on what we thought success should look like that we missed what it actually looked like." I looked around Derek's penthouse, at the modern art on the walls, the high-end furniture, the kitchen that probably cost more than my parents' car. But I also thought about the Derek who brought me coffee every morning, who listened to me complain about work, who held me when I was sad about my family's treatment of him. "He is a good man," I agreed. "But Mom, you need to understand something. Derek didn't become a good man when you found out he was wealthy. He was always a good man. You just couldn't see it because you were looking at the wrong things." There was a long pause. "You're right," my mother said finally. "We were wrong. About Derek, about what matters, about you too." "What do you mean?" "You saw something in Derek that we missed completely. You recognized his worth when we couldn't. That says something about your judgment, about your character. We've been treating you like the disappointing daughter, but maybe you're the wisest one of all of us." I felt tears stinging my eyes. It was the first time in my adult life that my mother had acknowledged that I might know something she didn't. "So will you come to dinner?" she asked again. "Both of you?" I looked at Derek, who had put down his newspaper and was watching me with interest. I mouthed dinner invitation and he nodded. "We'll be there," I said. "But Mom? This goes both ways. You get the chance to apologize and start over, but Derek and I get to be treated with respect from now on. No more comments about his car or his clothes or his lifestyle choices." "Of course," my mother said quickly. "Of course. We understand." After I hung up, Derek came over and wrapped his arms around me from behind. "How do you think that will go?" "Better than last time, I hope," I said, leaning back against his chest. "Though I have to admit, I'm curious to see how they act now that they know you could foreclose on them at any time." Derek laughed. "I'm not going to foreclose on them, Allison. They've been making their payments on time, and your father's restaurants are starting to turn around. They'll be fine. But they don't know that you're not going to foreclose. No, Derek agreed. They don't. You're enjoying this, aren't you? A little, Derek admitted. Is that terrible? I thought about all the snide comments, all the dismissive looks, all the times my family had made Derek feel small and unwelcome. No, I said finally. I think a little satisfaction is perfectly justified. That Sunday, Derek and I arrived at my parents' house together. Derek was wearing the same type of modest clothes he'd always worn, khakis, a button-down shirt, casual but neat. But somehow, he carried himself differently now. Or maybe my family was just seeing him differently. My father met us at the door, and the change in his demeanor was striking. Gone was the condescending authority figure. In his place was a man who looked genuinely grateful to see us. Derek, he said, extending his hand with what appeared to be genuine warmth. Thank you for coming. Thank you for having us, Derek replied, shaking his hand. As we walked into the living room, I noticed that the family photos on the mantelpiece had been rearranged. The prominent display now included several pictures of Derek and me together, photos that had been buried behind other family pictures before. My mother came out of the kitchen, and like my father, she seemed like a different person. The imperious woman who had judged Derek so harshly was gone, replaced by someone who seemed almost nervous. Derek, she said, approaching him carefully. I owe you an apology. Derek nodded but didn't speak, waiting for her to continue. I was wrong about you, my mother said, and I could see how difficult it was for her to admit this. I judged you based on superficial things, and I treated you poorly because of those judgments. I'm sorry. I appreciate that, Derek said quietly. I'm also sorry, my father added, for the things we said about your prospects, your success, your worth as a partner for our daughter. We were completely wrong, and we should have taken the time to get to know you as a person instead of making assumptions. Trevor and Hannah appeared from the kitchen, both looking significantly more subdued than usual. Trevor, in particular, looked like he'd aged 5 years in the past few weeks. Derek, Trevor said, his voice lacking its usual cockiness, I want to apologize too. For all the stuff I said about real estate agents, about your car, about your apartment. I was being a jerk, and I'm sorry. Hannah nodded eagerly. Me too. I'm sorry for making fun of your apartment building. That was really mean. Derek accepted their apologies graciously, but I could tell he wasn't entirely ready to forgive and forget. And honestly, I didn't blame him. Dinner was a surreal experience. My family, who had spent months treating Derek like he was beneath their notice, now hung on his every word. When he mentioned a property he was considering purchasing, my father asked thoughtful questions about market conditions and investment strategies. When he talked about his business philosophy, my mother listened with genuine interest. It was everything I'd wanted to see for months, my family treating Derek with respect, recognizing his intelligence and success. But there was something unsettling about it too. They weren't respecting Derek because they'd learned to see past superficial things. They were respecting him because they now knew he was wealthy and powerful. After dinner, my father asked Derek to step outside onto the back patio for a private conversation. Through the sliding glass door, I could see them talking seriously, my father gesturing occasionally, Derek listening with his arms crossed. What do you think they're talking about? Hannah asked, trying to peer out the window. Probably the payment plan, my mother said quietly. Your father wanted to discuss some of the terms. When they came back inside, both men looked satisfied with whatever they discussed. Everything okay? I asked Derek as we got ready to leave. Fine, Derek said. Your father had some questions about the mortgage terms. We worked it out. As we were saying our goodbyes, my mother pulled me aside. "Allison," she said quietly, "I want you to know how proud I am of you." Proud of me? For sticking by Derek when we were being so awful to him. For seeing his worth when we couldn't. For choosing love over our approval. She paused, looking embarrassed. "I realize now that you're a better judge of character than any of us." It was a moment I'd been waiting for my entire adult life, recognition from my mother that my choices, my judgment, my independence had value. But now that it was happening, it felt hollow somehow. "Mom," I said carefully, "I appreciate that. But I need you to understand something. Derek didn't become worthy of respect when you found out he was wealthy. He was always worthy of respect. The fact that it took learning about his financial success for you to see that, that's something you need to think about." My mother's face fell. "You're right. I know you're right. I don't know how to do better." "Start by judging people by how they treat others, not by what they own," I suggested. "Derek has been kind, respectful, and patient with this family even when we didn't deserve it. That's what should have mattered from the beginning." On the drive home, Derek was unusually quiet. "What did my father want to talk about?" I asked finally. Derek sighed. "He wanted to thank me for not foreclosing, and he wanted to know if there was anything he could do to show his appreciation." "What did you tell him?" "I told him that treating you with respect and recognizing your worth would be appreciation enough." I felt my chest tighten with emotion. "And what did he say?" "He said he was starting to understand that he'd been wrong about a lot of things, not just about me." We drove in comfortable silence for a while, both lost in our own thoughts. "Derek," I said as we pulled into his building's parking garage, "do you think they've really learned anything, or are they just scared of you now?" Derek turned off the engine and sat back in his seat. "Probably a little of both. But does it matter? The important thing is that they're treating you better now." "And you." "And me," Derek agreed. "Though I have to admit, their newfound respect feels conditional." "Because it is conditional. If you lost all your money tomorrow, they'd probably go back to thinking you weren't good enough for me." Derek nodded sadly. "Probably. But I wouldn't," I said firmly. "I fell in love with you when I thought you were struggling financially. Money doesn't change how I feel about you." Derek reached over and took my hand. "I know. That's why I love you." As we rode the elevator up to Derek's penthouse, I reflected on how much had changed in just a few months. My family's financial security now depended on the man they'd once dismissed as a loser. I was dating someone far more successful than I'd ever imagined. And for the first time in my life, my family was treating me like my opinions and choices mattered. But the most important thing hadn't changed at all. Derek was still the same thoughtful, caring, intelligent man I'd fallen in love with. He just happened to own 44 properties and hold my family's mortgage. "So what happens now?" I asked as Derek unlocked the door to his penthouse. "Now," Derek said, pulling me into his arms, "we figure out our future together. Without secrets this time. No more hidden business empires?" "No more hidden business empires," Derek promised. "Though I should probably mention that I'm considering expanding into commercial development." I laughed, shaking my head. "Any other surprises I should know about?" Derek pretended to think seriously. "Well, I've been thinking about asking you to move in with me." "Here? In the penthouse?" "Here, in the penthouse, with the man who loves you and wants to build a life with you. What do you think?" I looked around the stunning apartment, then back at Derek's hopeful face. 6 months ago, I'd been the family disappointment, dating a man my parents thought was beneath me. Now I was being asked to move in with a successful businessman who had quietly revolutionized my family's understanding of worth and success. I said, standing on my tiptoes to kiss him, that sounds perfect. 3 months later, I was officially living in Derek's penthouse and loving every minute of it. My family had settled into a new routine of treating both Derek and me with genuine respect and gratitude. My father's restaurants were doing better, partly because Derek had connected him with some potential investors who were interested in helping him expand. The monthly mortgage payments were being made on time, and my parents had even started putting extra money toward the principal. Derek had quietly restructured their payment plan twice, both times in their favor, though he'd asked me not to mention that to them. Let them think they're succeeding on their own merit, he'd said when I'd asked why he was being so generous. They need to rebuild their confidence. But the real change was in how my family saw me. No longer was I the disappointing daughter who couldn't make good choices. I was the daughter who'd recognized Derek's worth when no one else could, who'd stood by him when it would have been easier to cave to family pressure, who'd chosen love over approval. My mother had even started asking for my advice on things, financial decisions, family matters, even her own relationships. It was a complete reversal from the dynamic I'd grown up with. You know, Derek said one evening as we watched the sunset from his living room, I never planned for things to work out this way. What way? Your family depending on me financially, living together, all of it. When I bought that mortgage, I just wanted them to understand that they'd misjudged me. And now? Derek was quiet for a moment. Now I realized that buying their mortgage didn't just teach them a lesson about me. It taught them a lesson about you too. What do you mean? They spent years underestimating you, dismissing your judgment, treating you like you couldn't make good decisions. But when they found out who I really was, they had to confront the fact that you'd seen something in me that they'd completely missed. That made them realize that maybe your judgment was better than theirs all along. I thought about this. He was right. My family's newfound respect for me wasn't just about dating someone successful. It was about having been right when they were wrong, about having seen past surfaces to recognize something valuable. So in a way, I said slowly, your revenge wasn't just about them underestimating you. It was about them underestimating me too. Exactly. They got a 2-for-1 lesson in the dangers of making assumptions. I curled up against Derek's side, feeling grateful for everything that had happened, even the painful parts. My family's crisis had revealed Derek's true character, my own strength, and the shallow foundations of the judgments that had governed our family dynamics for years. Any regrets? I asked. Derek was quiet for a long moment. I regret not trusting you with the truth about my business earlier. I regret that it took a financial crisis for your family to treat you with respect. But I don't regret showing them who I really am. Even though it was manipulative? Was it? I bought a mortgage that was already in default from a bank that was losing money on it. I offered your family better terms than they had before. I provided them with a path to keep their home when they otherwise would have lost it. The only manipulation was in letting them draw their own conclusions about what that meant. Derek had a point. He hadn't set out to destroy my family, he'd simply positioned himself to help them when their own poor financial decisions caught up with them. The lesson they'd learned about assumptions and respect had been a natural consequence of the situation, not a cruel punishment. Besides, Derek added with a slight smile, seeing your father's face when he realized that the loser he'd been mocking for months was now his mortgage holder. That was worth the price of admission. I laughed, remembering that moment of shocked recognition. I thought Trevor was going to pass out. Trevor learned an important lesson about making assumptions. They all did. As the sun set over the city, painting Derek's penthouse in shades of gold and orange, I reflected on how perfect this revenge had been. It wasn't cruel or destructive. It was educational. My family had judged Derek based on superficial things and found themselves financially dependent on the man they'd dismissed. They'd treated me like I had poor judgment and discovered that I'd been right about Derek when they were wrong. The consequences fit the crime perfectly. They'd judged based on appearances, so Derek had shown them how wrong appearances could be. They'd questioned my ability to choose a worthy partner, so Derek had demonstrated his worth in terms they couldn't ignore. "Derek," I said as we watched the city lights begin to twinkle below us, "I love you. I love you too. Not because you're successful or wealthy or because you own 44 properties. 46 now, actually. I closed on 2 more this week." I looked at him in amazement. 46 properties? 46 properties, Derek confirmed with a grin. "But like I said, I love you too. Not because you saw my potential when no one else did, not because you stood up to your family for me, not because you're living in my penthouse. I love you because you're you. Even if I come with a family that judged you terribly and now depends on you financially?" "Especially because of that," Derek said, pulling me closer. "Because it means I get to wake up every day knowing that I chose the right woman, and she chose me back, even when it cost her." "It didn't cost me anything," I protested. "It gained me everything." Derek kissed the top of my head. "That's exactly what I mean." The most beautiful part of Derek's revenge wasn't the moment my family realized who he really was, though that was satisfying. It wasn't even the fact that he now held their mortgage, though the poetic justice of that was perfect. The most beautiful part was how completely he had flipped the script on everything they believed about success, worth, and judgment. My family had spent months convinced that they were superior to Derek, that their opinions mattered more than mine, that appearances told the whole story. In one evening, Derek had shown them that the man they dismissed as a failure was actually more successful than any of them, that the daughter they'd treated as naive had better judgment than they did, and that their assumptions about people were not just wrong but dangerously so. Looking back now, I realize that Derek's revenge was really about dignity. He didn't want to hurt my family, he wanted them to understand that their treatment of him had been unacceptable. He wanted them to recognize that success comes in many forms, that respect should be earned through character rather than granted based on appearances, and that love isn't something you get to approve or disapprove based on superficial criteria. Most importantly, he wanted them to see me clearly, not as the disappointing daughter who couldn't make good choices, but as the woman who had recognized something valuable that they had missed completely. Have you ever watched someone completely underestimate the wrong person? Have you ever seen assumptions get turned upside down in the most perfect way possible? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes the quiet ones, the modest ones, the ones who don't need to flash their success around, sometimes those are the ones with the most power of all. If you enjoyed this story about the dangers of judging people by appearances, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about karma, justice, and the beautiful moment when people get exactly what they deserve.